Hello, everyone. I am Northern Westman, and you are watching the Disciple Hour, episode 11. Today's topics are the sometimes anti white Supreme Court turned a checkbox into a text box. And we will also discuss idolatry and race brought to you by Pastor John MacArthur. And I am joined by Ian and Gentile Gentleman. Hello, lads.
Hello.
Hello there.
All right, we'll begin with the Supreme Court decision. So, this is hot news at the moment. The Supreme Court will no longer, quote unquote, um, select applicants for their race. So, they have removed the checkbox for race. However, they are now going to leave a text box where you can describe your experience of racial discrimination. And we all know that inside the anti-white narrative, that doesn't apply to white people. So, did anything change at all? What do you think, gentlemen?
Well, I think we understand that under anti-whiteism, they're always going to find some way around it because, the laws, people who are determined to get a certain outcome are going to find a loophole in which they can do it. So, in something like admissions to college, they can still they can sort of find other loopholes and workarounds for it to get their desired results. And we're even seeing, people in academia already coming out and talking about how they'll just find ways to circumvent this ruling. So no, I don't think it ultimately changes all that much.
Yeah, it's definitely like you said, the applications used to simply have a box that you checked, and that would either help or count against you in getting accepted. And now the ruling basically just makes it to where you have to write down if, being a certain race has affected you in some way, and then it serves the exact same purpose. So there's a slight increase in the effort on the side of the applicant, but that's really about it. The admissions really don't change, and their ability to make decisions based on race is unchanged. And even the Supreme Court says that in their ruling that they can use, you know, racial topics to decide whether or not to admit someone to the college. They just can't explicitly do it, which really is the same thing.
It's always like this.
I think it's interesting. Oh, yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think it's interesting you talk about how race has affected you, but I wonder if a white person were to apply and say that they've been disadvantaged by anti-whiteism, through, having to sit through courses where people denigrate your ancestors and denigrate your history, told that, the things that you value are inherently evil, and they call you names like racist, white supremacist, and all these other slurs. Many white children attend schools like that, and, there's plenty of stories out there of white children who attended schools where they were in the minority, and how essentially they were targeted by bullies for being white because they were perceived as weaker. And probably they also knew that in the anti-white narrative they don't have the moral high ground to defend themselves, so a lot of them were going to be too scared to fight back. So that's obviously traumatic for anybody, and it's based on race. But I wonder if they would actually be sympathetic to a story like that, or whether they would just ignore that, saying that doesn't fit the anti-white narrative.
I feel like if anything, that would actually count against you to be a white person to say that somehow you've suffered because of your race. That might just anger them.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and like we talked about as we were preparing for the show, we may as well just bring it out straight away. Is the Supreme Court has consistently in the past ruled in favor of what the colleges were doing for decades. These exact same cases and concerns were brought to them many times over the last, several decades by white people, and it either didn't make it to the Supreme Court, it was thrown out, or they were ruled against. And suddenly now that a group of, Asian plaintiffs have brought the case, all of a sudden now, these policies need to be changed. And if it was wrong now, then it's wrong back then. And they never cared about it until they realized, oh, we're accidentally doing something that's anti-Asian and not something that's anti-white. They never cared when it was anti-white. They only care now that it affects somebody else.
Yeah, and even among a lot of conservatives who champion this cause, they always have to frame it in terms of, oh, this is so harmful to Asian people, because none of them is courageous enough to actually speak out about how it victimizes white people. And victimized might sound like a strong word, but I mean, think about it. I mean, if you're pursuing a career, if you need education, this could be the difference between whether you ever find, you know, housing in a good neighborhood, whether you're ever able to start a family, whether you're able to provide for your family. I mean, these things do affect you. And, if you're depending on an education system to help you attain your career goals, I mean, that's definitely harmful to people who may have worked very hard for something.
But yeah, the left, anti-whites, they've done such a good job of forcing, white people to be afraid to explicitly point out their own grievances. And so instead they adopt the strategy of, well, let's just make sure to focus on the Asians and then we might benefit as a side effect, but never actually, take the stand that no, no, this affects us regardless of how it affects anyone else, and that's wrong. They are so browbeaten into falling into that, you know, use of language, that it ends up serving the anti-whites even more, because even an issue that affects us, we still have to frame it in some way it affecting other people in the hopes that we accidentally benefit from the result, and it's abusive, in a very specific way. It's kind of like a beaten housewife where, she's too afraid to go and seek help, with her husband. And so instead she has to cower and just hope that through his good graces, he, it harms her less. It's a terrible position for us to be in and to accept.
It is. It is.
Mm.
I mean, it's disgusting to watch. My brethren being so full of white noir that, like you said, they like parasite off of the Asians' victory. And the reason is, I mean, we are accused of being all sorts of villains. Racists, bigot, hater, etc., anti-white slurs, and white people don't see themselves as a people. We've been taught to be individuals, but non-whites, they can have a racial identity and group together. Good for them. But we are a deracinated race. We are just a gene pool, and we are being discriminated against based on our race. But we are too afraid to browbeaten, like you said, to defend ourselves on the basis of our race. And that has to change if we are going to survive. And so we talked about this. In order to reverse this, in order to get rid of this policy, we have to call out the demon by its name. And the name of this spell is anti-whiteism. We have to ban anti-whiteism in applications. If we do not call it that, then we will just be chasing the anti-white tail. We won't get anywhere. And I'm afraid that what was it in the 90s white people try to fight this in court, I'm interested to know what kind of language did they use. Like, were they inside the anti-white narrative, kind of saying, "Oh, can't you see how this is bad? Oh, can't you see how this is harming others? Oh," or did they take a stand against anti-whiteism? I think not. I think they didn't. And so this will only change when people face the demon and call out the demon.
Yeah, it is very true. We have to be specific. And I definitely will try to look into and see if there's a way to see the exact language. Usually, when the court doesn't make a decision, like when they throw something out, it's kind of hard to find documentation. Definitely, there's going to be a lot of news articles about it, and that would be very interesting to look into to see what kind of language that they used. But yeah, like you said, it's all about the lens of anti-whiteism. White people, like you said, they're not allowed to unify as a race. But if a white person stands up and says us white people are collectively guilty for what white people have done in the past, then it's okay to be racinated because they're accepting an anti-white premise. As long as it's an anti-white racial consciousness, then it's okay. It's when you have a positive racial consciousness for white people that it is bad. And in these types of situations, the same thing. These conservatives, they have to stand up and they have to say like, oh, these poor Asian people, because they are so afraid of the anti-white slur, of racist, or the slur of bigot that's used against us to shut us down, because they cannot stand up for themselves in a positive way when it comes to white people. They can only talk about white people as a collective in a negative way because they've adopted that anti-white narrative and they've trapped themselves in it. They've almost played by the rules for so long that they'd be hypocritical not to at this point.
Well said. And I might just throw it in. If white people do say that both white people and Asians are being discriminated against by quote unquote affirmative action, then we don't really have a people. If we cannot stand by ourselves, if we always have to hatch onto others, then we don't have a people. And you can see, I'm not like trying to throw the Asians under the bus, but you can clearly see that they were not fighting for us. They were fighting for themselves. And that's just the reality of it. I mean, they are very racially aware, and they were fighting for their rights. And they had a great victory. I mean, hats off to them, I guess. But we need to learn how to stand for our people. And just, I can't stress this enough. Like, we don't have a people. We are just a gene pool, a deracinated gene pool, um, poisoned with, rabid individualism. But the truth is, in a world of collectives, individualism is suicide. Now, I'm not advocating for like individualism where you share your wife with your neighbor or whatever, nothing like that, but coming together as a people. Your well-being, your individual well-being is dependent on the group's well-being. If everyone around you, if every one of your neighbors is addicted to drugs, pornography, etc., that you will suffer from that. I mean, your children will be around, abused children, and I mean, it's gonna mess them up. Like, we need a group well-being, and I just wish people could understand that.
Well, yeah, really, we should take this as an example of what having a group identity can do for us. When you have enough people who get together and who are, loud enough to speak up for themselves, what can happen. And you're right. The Asians didn't do this for us. They did it for themselves. They explicitly said so. And if these admissions, quotas were not affecting them negatively, would they ever have taken the case to court? Of course not. And there's no one to blame them for that. We need to start being the heroes in our own story. We need to start standing up for ourselves, irrespective of what the rest of the world is doing. The Asians, like you said, they can take care of themselves, and we can take care of ourselves if only we would ever have the courage to do it. And that's to our detriment, is that we simply do not have the courage to stand up and demand the same type of respects and the same courtesies and considerations that other groups ask without shame at all.
Well said. And this actually ties into our next topic. Um, there's this pastor called John MacArthur, and I'm not going to accuse him of anything, but it seems like he might be intimidated by the relentless, um, pervasive anti whiteism all around us, which is omnipotent, I'm afraid to say. Um, or, no, I shouldn't say that. Omnipresent, not omnipotent. Uh, it's pervasive, it's everywhere, you can't escape it. But so the white race um, can place abstractions like above reality more so than any other race can. And so, we have this ideal. Well, this ideal has been placed into our heads that, race should not matter. Race should not matter. It's a wishful thinking. Race should not matter. Well, it's like saying, gender, sex should not matter. But it does. It does. And, you know, whites, they like to think that, oh, we should just, shut our eyes to race. Just stick your head in the sand, don't notice it. But that makes things worse. Most other races, well, I mean, all other races are racially aware, and we will suffer tremendously if we do not um, receive a positive racial identity. And I'm gonna play a video. Um, it's just a short part from a sermon by John MacArthur, where he kind of, it's just a bizarre sermon. Let's just watch it, and then we'll dissect it. Okay.
You have to remember that we are the temple of God. The church is the temple of God, individually and collectively. And this is to remind us that that is our identity. There's a lot of people throwing identity all over the place. I'm not defined by any other identity than, in this text, the temple of the living God. And oh, by the way, for you who wondered, I'm not white. I'm brown like everybody else.
Well, I mean, that was the main takeaway that was so bizarre. Like, I'm not white. I'm brown like everyone else. It's just bizarre. And let's just
Yeah, I mean,
no, go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, I mean, like he's talking about it in the context of identity and idolatry. I mean, he's saying that, that he's implying that, the love of one's race or the care about one's race is a form of idolatry. And I think certainly for some people it can be that, but it's not inherently that. And the fact that he would have to say, I'm not white, I'm brown like everybody else, to me, it's almost like it came across like he's trying to, denigrate his very being of the race that God made him a part of. The fact that he has to deny it as if it's something meaningless or something to make fun of. That's just again, that seems kind of offensive if you ask me, because he's denigrating his entire race by saying that, implying that it's of no value.
It's really bizarre. And if we just take a step back and just define idolatry, like Gentile said before we started the show, idolatry is placing something above God, right? It can be money, it can be worldly pleasures, etc. And so, I mean, Gentile, do you want to take it away? I mean, you had a pretty good analogy of, if you have a wife, you love your wife. Is that idolatry? No, not necessarily.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the way that I worded it was that, in this worldly realm, that we are in, God has not established his kingdom yet. So in this worldly realm, we do have worldly cares and worldly worries and things that we have to manage in the meantime. And so, yeah, if you're married, to your wife, you love your wife and you cherish her, and the Bible even says to be gentle with her and to cherish her above all others, obviously not above God. So if your wife tells you, oh, we have to, live an ungodly life in order for me to stay happily married to you, then you have to tell her, then unfortunately we cannot be happily married because I must live a godly life. That is loving her by making sure that you are always encouraging that godly life, but you're not putting her above God. And like you said, with money, sure, we don't put God above money, but do we still have to pay our rent at the end of every month? Yes. And that's a worry. And it's something that we have to take care of and that we have to be mindful of. And we have to make sure that we do. It would be dishonorable and unloving of us to not make sure that we paid our rent so that our family can have a home or our mortgage. Right, but that doesn't mean we put it above God. And the same thing with race, understanding that we are members of a specific group of people with a specific biospirit, a specific culture, and outward expression of how we deal with the world and deal with each other. And we have this set of behaviors and these set of standards that are unique to us. Simply understanding that we're going to work best when we are with people who have that same biospirit and share those same standards isn't placing it above God, and any more than for a black person to say the same thing. Oh well, I do better when I live around and I'm near black people. They understand me better. We get along. We kind of know what to expect from each other. We have similar standards and viewpoints of the world. So I like being around people like me. This person would never have the courage to make that exact same claim in a church full of, black people. He just wouldn't. And something else he does here is actually very nefarious. He says that, to have any identity that's not, just the temple of God is bad. And I'm not white, I'm brown like everyone else. He does two things here. He denigrates white as though it's a negative, and then immediately adopts brown as though it's a positive, even though he just said you shouldn't have any identity that's not the temple of God. So why did he even say the word brown then? Rejecting white, rejecting yourself, that's bad enough. But he added that it's okay to identify as brown as long as you're not identifying as white. So he's hypocritical 10 seconds after what he just said by accepting brown as his identity, but he had to denigrate white in order to do it. So what he does there is extremely nefarious language, very nefarious language.
Yeah, well said.
Yes, that's a more articulate way of what I was trying to say.
I just steal your ideas, Ian. That's what I do.
Well,
I
hey,
mean,
as long as you can state them better than I can. Go ahead.
Yeah, in my opinion, this is just a bizarre comparison. I'm talking about you can't dine with demons and then drink from the cup of the Lord. That comparison with a racial identity. So, an identity is essential. Or do we no longer believe in men and women? Like you are born either or. If you're born intersex, then it's a mistake in the womb. Not enough testosterone or whatever. Any other gender identity is, in my opinion, a disgrace in the eyes of God. I mean, He made man and He made woman. Those are identities. Those are the gender identities of the Bible that comport with the Bible. So, are you a sinner for identifying as your biological sex? I mean, that's just outright ridiculous, just ludicrous. I identify as a man. I am a man. I'm created in God's image and I am a man. All right, got that off my chest. Now, I'm not going to accuse John MacArthur. I sincerely hope he's comparing the people, the mad dogs who are under the spell of anti-whiteism, with demons, but not all ordinary people who have a positive identity, whether sexual or racial. I might add, I'm also a white man. It's just my identity. But yeah, I just don't know what to think of this. It's such a bizarre take. And like you said, it borders nefariousness. You know, uh, denying, undermining a white identity, but then just adopting a brown identity in the same sentence. And I'm trying to change my attitude. I'm not trying to accuse people because Satan is the one who accuses, but just, theoretically, generally speaking, someone who denigrates, you know, white identity but praises non-white identity, uh, generally that person would be branded anti-white. Hmm? So yeah, I don't want to accuse the guy, but it's so bizarre. I'm actually gonna write him a letter. I'm gonna write this man a letter. Just uh, ask him what did you mean, and point out these things that we mentioned here.
Yeah,
Well,
I
yeah,
mean, I will say for John MacArthur, he is a pretty solid guy on a lot of issues, but he's a he's unfortunately stuck inside a lot of the anti-white narrative, as unfortunately too many people today are. I think he's better preachers out there.
yeah, and it is, very smart of you to bring up male and female, because male and female, not only is it a God ascribed identity, like two identities that were created by God, but that have entire books, and chapters throughout the Bible that delineate specific behaviors, attitudes, and, expectations of both of those identities. So to not accept those identities within the earthly realm would be to not follow God's command. To say, oh, yeah, I'm a man, and there's all these things in the Bible that say that men have to do X, Y, and Z, and they should treat their wives like X, Y, and Z. But, I don't identify as anything, so I'm just not going to do all of that. Like, you don't have a choice not to identify as what you are. It's this entire premise that you can choose to identify or not identify as something that you are is ludicrous. It really is insane. That's like saying, you don't have to identify as a human. Like you're just a biological organism that happens to be on the same planet as everybody else. Like that would be absurd. But when they specifically want to deny you membership to something that you are a member of, whether they say you are or not. That's the only time they try to work these spellcrafts, this magic that they work on your mind with words. And yeah, like you guys said, if he's solid on a lot of other topics, I mean, that's good for him. But if anything, we should, maybe even send him this podcast to really actually listen to, some clear thoughts, and maybe even listen back to what he said. Maybe he doesn't even realize it, right? I think assuming the best intentions, like Northern Westman said, is the best way to go about it. But yeah, in his position, maybe he just doesn't hear this kind of feedback.
Yeah, I was muted. Yes. Um, you know, many many Christians just are afraid of this topic, and I mean, I understand. I mean, you get the tsunami of anti-white slurs. It's messy, but I was just gonna briefly say while you were talking, I remembered that Paul the apostle, he was quite aware of his identity as a Hebrew, and especially of the tribe of Benjamin. Uh, I just remembered it while you were talking, and I mean he writes it in one of his letters. I can't remember exactly which. Was it the Romans? Can't remember. I mean he mentioned the tribe of Benjamin, a Pharisee, and of the tribe of Benjamin. That's an identity. Being a Pharisee, that's an identity. Being of the tribe of Benjamin, that's an identity. you know, Calling people Gentiles, you're giving them an identity. It's like, bro, how can you not see it? It's just bizarre. That's the only take I have. It's so bizarre that, and I'm gonna, like you said, I'm gonna assume the best intentions, and I'm just gonna respectfully reach out to the man. Um, I think he is quite anointed, but we trip and fall, and we forgive him. So yeah, just would like to politely, point these things out.
Yeah, no,
For sure.
absolutely. And really, the best way to handle it for these people, and it's the way that they never go, is if they truly believed race, doesn't matter, or that it's somehow bad. Why don't they say that to everyone? Again, it only seems like white preachers ever say this. It's
Yeah,
only to white people that it's ever said to. Like, you will never see a white preacher go into a community that's all black and give a sermon in their local church about how they need to stop caring about the fact that they're black. I mean, it would be so absurd. And they would, like, the black people would reject it outright and possibly even aggressively or violently. So it's never done in those cases. It's only done, to the people that are already suffering anti-whiteism. And that's the only thing that really makes me upset about it. If he was going around saying it to everyone and it was his mission to de-racify everybody, I would disagree with it, but at least he's being consistent. But yeah,
yeah,
it's never consistent.
yeah. And I think this man truly wants to be, in this world, but not of this world. But the thing is, and you can't please God and be friends with the world, right? But the thing is, like, if you don't truly know the world, then how can you, like, uh, should I put this? Like, if you don't, you have to know the world in order to, you have to know what is a sin and etc. The law existed to make the offenses visible, right? But and I'm not going to go on camera and say that anti-whiteism is sin, but anti-whiteism is truly just, it's demonic. I'll just say that. And it has no place in Christianity. And it's very subtle. Most people don't see it, or they're so sick by it that they don't want to see it. They don't want to face it. But I'm gonna give this man the benefit of the doubt. Maybe just he has become affected by the world, and the world currently is vehemently anti-white, especially in the West. Anti-whiteism is everywhere, and hopefully he'll just see it and just decide not to talk about these issues again. Like you said, I mean, Ian, you've clearly listened to him. He's solid on other issues. Like I said, I think he is anointed. But even anointed people can make mistakes, and we forgive such mistakes. I think that is the Christian way to go about this.
I was wondering if I could actually else about this topic of racial. I mean,
You're kind of breaking up. It's like a robotic voice.
some people. Yeah. Hold on a sec. Can you hear? Okay, I see. Sorry, I guess my connection's a bit spotty today, but looks like we lost Gentile gentleman. Or okay, he's back. Okay. So what I was gonna say was I did think that it's important to. Can you hear me now? Cut this out.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so for some people, it is possible for their race to become an idol. I mean, we've dealt with some people in white sympathetic circles who do think that race is more important than God. Some of them are not believers. Some of them are gods, like pagan gods and things like that. So, one thing that they often dislike about us Christian that we put God first and our race is not the first thing in our lives. And I think that for people like that, you could legitimately say their race is an idol to them. It's something that they care more about than God. And they try to find a form of religion that will support that view of things. So I think maybe we should note that it is possible for a race to be an idol, and that is something we should be aware of. But again, it's not, caring about your race and honoring the race God made you a part of is not in itself idolatry. So that's an important distinction to make. And when people want to say that it's inherently idolatrous to care about your race, that's simply not true.
Yeah, that is true. And you put it quite well. That's something that I was trying to say that when he said, you can't dine with demons and then drink from the cup of the Lord. I sincerely hope he was talking about these specific peoples. There are some people, like you said, who are, well, just outright nasty. And they've turned race into an idol. The white race, they worship the white race. They say that their race is their religion and stuff. And we do get some pagans against us for putting God and Jesus way above our race. But so be it. Let them be angry. I'm not gonna forfeit my position. And
Amen.
yeah, amen. Yeah, I mean, I remember we discussed this in our Bible group, and like when these pagans were, well, not being very nice to us, let's say. And we talked about how we see white positivity and racial identity from from the point of Christ. Christ is the rock, and white positivity, that's second place. And yeah, I mean, it's just a healthy racial identity. We acknowledge the differences between the races and the sexes. Is either sex better than the other? No. And the same thing applies to the races. There's no better race than another. We are just different. We are the way that God made us. I'm not going to apologize if for being a part of the white race. Our people, Western kind, we have built a magnificent civilization. And even before we became Christian, I mean, the Greco-Romans was a glorious civilization, and then it became even more glorious when we became Christian. And I credit that to God, to Christianity. And we create a certain society, Western society, that non-white peoples as a group cannot replicate. And how can I prove that? Well, show me a country where you find Western civilization without white people, without Western kind. And just be honest with yourself. No such country exists. And so this is just something that people have to come to grips with. It's just, you have to humble yourself, just admit it, just have the humility to admit it. That's all I can say.
Well, and another way to express that never gets expressed is it is part of loving your neighbor. What do we see in the West so much now? And for decades, we saw us demanding that people who were not us behave like us. And if it doesn't come naturally to them, that's not loving your neighbor. Sometimes loving your neighbor, really does mean just staying out of his business and leaving him alone. Loving your neighbor is not forcing your affections and your care upon him like a lot of progressive politics demand that we do. They demand that we take responsibility for other people's situations, or how they perform, or how their lives turn out, and somehow if they don't turn out good, that's somehow our fault. It's this constant demand that we put ourselves in other people's business when really we shouldn't. And oftentimes people who are members of those groups say, stay out of our business. And so there's layers and layers, to why not only this is beneficial and right, but how other groups of people would probably prefer that we stopped caring so much about them, or really even just stopped putting ourselves in their business. And some separation and some mutual respect can go such a long way.
Amen. And I might just add to that. I might just add, you do not accuse your neighbor if you love your neighbor. We get accused, we Western kind, we get accused of a lot. We get accused of being, single-handedly responsible for slavery, which is just, first of all, totally wrong. And second, we were the ones who abolished slavery around the globe. And, just these accusations against our people, against little children, they get accused of being a part of an evil race. You don't do that to your neighbor, like you said. That's a very good point. You do not accuse those whom you love and those whom you have compassion for. And I'm really trying to not accuse anyone. Uh, it's hard. I mean, I guess it's in our nature to point fingers and accuse people, but Satan is the accuser. And when you accuse, you are, being like Satan. You are being like the accuser. Uh, we are called to be holy and, to be like Christ without sin, flawless. So we cannot point fingers and accuse. Now, I know that some people are going to say, hey, but Jesus called them, the a viper race, generation of vipers, etc. But I mean, he was the Lord, so I'm just not gonna. I don't want to accuse anyone, and I don't want to be accused either.
Ian, you
Yeah, I
were gonna say
mean,
something.
was I?
Yeah, you were gonna say something a second ago. Go for it.
Oh, I was just agreeing with Northern Westman that it's good to be careful about making accusations of people, because I think there are people who I think have shown some, like John MacArthur, he has shown a desire and a commitment to truth in the past. So I don't, you know, he's just one man. He has his flaws, but to be Tory toward him for not perfectly accepting certain things is is something people should be slow to do. And I know that John MacArthur has in the past recanted certain doctrines that he espoused because upon further scripture reading he came to believe that his positions were wrong. So I think that he is the kind of guy who does have some integrity when it comes to seeking the truth. So yeah, I just it's good to, if you're dealing with people who show a commitment to integrity, then you should definitely be slow to accuse those people.
That's a very good point. Yeah, I mean that's if he has done that in the past, then that's a very good sign. That takes courage and humility to do. So I hope he will have a change of heart in this case as well.
So do you think we should wrap up then?
Yes, good podcast, good session.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
it's always good.
everyone, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.
God bless.
God bless.